Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't start out with a plan to live under the streets. I started out with a key. It was the kind of key nobody outside city work ever thinks about. An old brass utility key on a battered ring. The one I used for years to open sidewalk vaults and service hatches when I was a subcontractor doing underground locating and fiber repair. When the first week of the outbreak turned our neighborhood into a place you moved through only when you had to, that key became the difference between hiding in plain sight and being trapped in a dead-end apartment. On day 8, I stopped pretending my building was a bunker. It wasn't. It was a stack of thin walls and shared hallways and strangers' footsteps above me. When the power went, the stairwell turned into a sound funnel. When the water pressure started pulsing like a weak heartbeat, I knew the pumps were failing or the mains were being shut in sections. And when I heard the first door lottery, people testing knobs down the hall, one by one, I packed my bag. I'm not a soldier, I'm not a hero. I'm a guy who used to get calls at 3 a.m. because somebody hit a conduit with a backhoe and the whole block lost internet. I knew how cities breathe, through ducts, pipes, and hidden corridors. And I knew something most people never learn. Beneath the busiest streets are networks built for maintenance, not comfort. Service tunnels, utility galleries, old freight passages, interconnected basements, and easements that were never meant to be public, but were meant to be accessed. That's where I went. The access point was a sidewalk vault 2 blocks from a police precinct that was now dark. The metal lid was heavy and ugly, set flush in the concrete with a rectangular pull slot. In normal times, you'd never touch it without cones and a permit. In those days, nobody cared about permits. They cared about noise and about being seen. I waited until late afternoon, when the light between buildings turned gray and the street noise, what little was left, softened. I wore a high-visibility vest over a hoodie because people still read that shape as work, even when their brains were fried with fear. I carried a backpack and a battered tool tote that looked legit from 10 feet away. In the tote, a small pry bar, work gloves, a folding saw, and a headlamp with a strip of red film taped over the lens. No bright white beams. No attention. The utility key turned in the lock with a gritty click. I lifted the lid an inch, then froze. Sound is everything when you're trying not to announce yourself. The lid wanted to scrape on concrete like a dinner plate on stone. I eased it down onto a folded rag and shifted it sideways, keeping metal from grinding. Underneath, a ladder raked with rust and a breath of air that smelled like wet concrete and old electricity. I took a last look up at the street, at windows like blind eyes, and climbed down. The first chamber was a telecom vault, big enough to stand in, lined with cable racks and dead junction boxes. A little water pooled in the corners. I clicked my headlamp on, red glow only, and the room didn't flare, it just warmed. That's what you want underground. Enough to see, not enough to throw a beacon. Past the vault was a narrow passage with a concrete shelf on one side, metal brackets on the other, and a cable tray overhead. It wasn't a sewer, that's important. Sewers are everywhere, but living in them is a fantasy until you've spent 10 minutes breathing in what they hold. This was a service corridor, dry by design, used to carry communications and electrical feeders between buildings and street cabinets. The air moved, slow but present, drawn through grates and building chases. It was a place meant for people to work in, not a place meant to swallow them. I'd always joked that the underground is a second city. That day, it stopped being a joke. The passage widened into a junction where 3 corridors met. One was bricked off with a patch job and a faded "Danger High Voltage" sign. Another dropped down a short ramp where I could hear a steady drip. The third ran straight and clean, the concrete stamped with old dates and utility markings. On the wall, someone had painted a simple arrow years ago, to Vault 14. I followed the clean one. It took me 30 minutes to reach what I was looking for. A steel gate, the kind used to keep the public out of maintenance space, bolted into the concrete with thick brackets. It was half open, hanging a little crooked, and someone had cut the original lock long ago. On the other side, the corridor changed. Older brick, different ceiling height, iron pipes thick as my thigh running parallel to the wall, and the floor was smoother, like it had been worn by wheels. I knew that feel. Old freight tunnel construction. A long time ago, parts of downtown and a lot of American cities had hidden tunnel systems built to move goods and utilities. Most people never see them. They get sealed, repurposed, forgotten, but they exist. And they have one thing apartments don't: multiple exits. That was the hook. That was why the idea became more than hiding. It became a safe zone. I didn't claim the whole network in a day. I claimed one node and made it defensible. The first rule was simple: control access. Underground networks are generous until they aren't. A corridor becomes a trap if you can't close it behind you. So I started with the gate. The brackets were good, the hinge pins were worn but intact. The problem was the latch, bent and unreliable. I didn't have a welder, I didn't have power tools. I had scavenged hardware and my hands. The first lock was ugly but effective. A length of hardened chain taken off a shuttered bike shop, threaded through the gate's mesh and around the wall bracket, then secured with 2 padlocks in parallel. Redundancy matters. People cut one lock, they feel clever. 2 locks slows them down enough for you to hear. I also did something most people forget. I made it quiet. Metal gates rattle, chains clink, hinges squeal. Sound travels farther underground than you'd think because corridors act like tubes. So I wrapped the chain where it touched metal with strips of rubber I sliced from an abandoned floor mat. I greased the hinge with petroleum jelly from a first aid kit. I wedged a folded piece of dense foam, taken from a discarded office chair cushion, between the gate and the frame so it wouldn't chatter. Then I moved inward and built a second choke point. The safe zone couldn't be one door. One door is a single failure. If someone forced it, or if something drifted down the corridor drawn by sound, you needed a fallback position. I chose a storage alcove where the tunnel widened beside a row of old utility cabinets. The alcove had a concrete lip at the entrance and a ceiling beam exposed enough to anchor to. I dragged in a rolling steel barrier I found in a delivery basement, one of those crowd control gates used for events. It wasn't meant to stop a determined person, but it was meant to create delay and noise. I anchored it with wedge bolts and steel strap I cut and bent by hand. On the floor, I laid strips of rubber to keep it from scraping. Then I rigged it with a simple mechanical latch, a steel rod through aligned holes and a padlock to keep the rod from being pulled. That became my man trap. Not a fancy airlock, just a 2-stage entry. Gate 1. Wait, listen. Gate 2, confirm, move. By the end of that first night, I had a defended pocket of tunnel about the size of a small apartment, minus the windows. And because I'd spent years working around city infrastructure, I knew what else mattered: air, water, and discipline. Air first. People imagine underground as endless oxygen. It isn't. Some corridors are well ventilated through grates and building systems. Some are dead pockets where stale air sits. I didn't guess. I tested. I had a small battery carbon monoxide monitor in my kit, an old habit from working in generator rooms and cramped vaults. Carbon monoxide is a silent problem, and if you bring any kind of combustion down there, even a small camping stove, it becomes a real risk. The monitor didn't show anything alarming in my pocket zone. That was good. But humidity was a slow enemy. Concrete sweats, water seeps. If you sleep down there long enough, everything you own starts to smell like damp stone, and your lungs feel it. So I chose a sleeping spot away from the drip line and elevated my gear on a shelf of cable trays I repurposed as a platform. I used plastic sheeting, construction wrap found in a building lobby, to make a simple vapor barrier behind my bedding. Water came next. For the first few days I carried what I could, then I got smarter. Cities leak. Not in the dramatic way, just in the everyday way. A valve packing drips. A pipe joint weeps. In one side corridor I found a small valve chamber with a slow, steady drip from a flange. Not clean enough to trust raw, but clean enough to collect. I set up a catch, a clean plastic bin, a folded piece of plastic as a channel, and a coffee filter as a first pass. Then I treated it. First with a few drops of household bleach I'd scavenged, then with a compact water filter I'd kept from hiking days. It wasn't luxury, it was survival grade. By day 10, I wasn't alone. I met Elena in the stairwell of a darkened clinic. She was a paramedic, still wearing her uniform shirt under a jacket, hair tied up like she refused to let the world take that control from her. She had a trauma bag, a radio that only hissed, and the look of someone who'd seen too many things without being able to stop them. She didn't trust me until I showed her the utility key and explained what the tunnels were. I didn't sell it as a fortress, I sold it as an option. "You're saying there's a way to move without being seen," she said. "I'm saying there's a way to move without being in the open," I corrected. Seen is still possible. Heard is the bigger problem. She followed me that night, walking behind me with a small flashlight pointed at her feet, covered with her fingers to keep it dim. When we reached the gate, I made her stop while I listened. We waited a full minute in silence. Underground, that minute felt like a year. Nothing. I opened the first lock, then the second, then eased the gate through without letting it clank. Elena stepped into my pocket zone and let out a breath she'd been holding for days. 2 nights later, she brought Marcus. Marcus wasn't a fighter. Marcus was an information guy. He'd worked IT for a mid-sized company and had the kind of brain that wanted patterns even when the world was chaos. He carried a laptop that barely held a charge and a city map he'd printed before printers became useless. He also carried a small tool pouch and a handful of glow sticks. "Light discipline," I said, nodding at the glow sticks. He shrugged. "I used to do server room outages. You learn to work in the dark." By day 12, our safe zone became a tiny community. Not a crowded camp, 3 people is manageable. 3 people is also a triangle of trust, which is never stable. Add 1 more and you get alliances. The 4th came in the form of Ray, a retired transit electrician who'd been living in a maintenance room inside a parking structure. He knew switches, circuits, and how to make something work with half the parts missing. He also had one priceless item, a hand-crank radio that could pick up faint emergency broadcasts when the air was right. Ray walked our tunnel pocket like he was reading the walls. "This isn't just telecom," he said, running his fingers over a conduit run. "You've got old electrical feeders in here. Some of these could still be live if a substation loops feeding them." That was a problem, and an opportunity. Live power underground can kill you. Live power can also charge a battery if you know what you're doing and you can do it safely. We weren't going to play hero with unknown voltage. But Ray marked every live-looking cabinet with bright tape and told us the rules. No touching, no leaning gear against boxes, no water near anything suspicious. The safe zone rules became our religion. No shouting. If you have to call someone, you tap. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. A simple code. No bright white light, red only. If you need white for repair, you do it behind a tarp shield and you warn everyone first. No open flame unless the carbon monoxide monitor is active and someone is awake watching it. No moving gates without a spotter. One person works the lock. One person listens down the corridor with their head tilted like an animal. And most important, no new exits opened without a plan to close them again. That last rule came from a mistake. On day 15, Marcus found a service hatch in a side passage. It was a vertical shaft leading up to a sidewalk grate, the kind you walk over without thinking. Marcus, curious and restless, wanted to open it from below to see where it came out. "It's an escape route," he argued. "It's also a speaker," I said. "You open that, you might as well put a megaphone in the street." He looked at me like I was being dramatic. Then Ray took a pebble and dropped it into the shaft. We listened as it clinked, echoed, and carried. "Sound goes up," Ray said, "and it comes back down." Marcus backed off. Rule reinforced. We weren't the only ones underground. We learned that slowly, the way you learn bad news when you don't want to see it. It started with chalk. A simple white line on the wall near a junction we hadn't marked. I thought it was old utility marking at first. Then I saw the fresh dust on the floor beneath it, like someone had rubbed chalk recently. The next day, Elena found a strip of blue tape wrapped around a pipe, right at eye level. Not our tape. Then Ray noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A hinge we'd greased on the outer gate was dry. Not just dry, wiped. Someone had touched it. We didn't panic. Panic is noise. We did what underground people do. We mapped. Marcus became obsessed in a useful way. He started drawing our tunnel pocket on paper with careful scale estimates, counting steps, measuring corridor width by arm span, noting the position of cabinets and junctions. Ray used old transit habits to estimate direction changes by the feel of the corridors. I used what I knew. Service tunnels follow street grids, building footprints, and utility alignments. They intersect at predictable points: fault clusters, major electrical feeds, old freight junctions. If someone else was down here, they were either homeless and wandering, or they were doing the same thing we were doing, searching for a defensible pocket. And if they were searching, they were leaving marks. The paranoia didn't come from fear of monsters. It came from fear of people. A person can learn your locks, a person can wait. A person can decide they want what you built. We adjusted. First, we made our markings invisible to outsiders. Marcus had been using arrows and letters with a marker at first, quick and clear. We stopped. Instead, we used a dot code only we understood. Small scratch marks low on the wall, behind pipes, at ankle height where you wouldn't notice unless you looked. 1 scratch meant dead end. 2 meant turn back. 3 meant safe zone this direction. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Second, we built noise alarms that didn't require batteries. At the outer gate, I hung a thin line of fishing line, scavenged from a sporting goods store, across the corridor at shin height, anchored to a small bell taken off a bicycle. If someone walked through without seeing it, the bell would ring softly, not loud enough to echo far, but loud enough for us to hear in our pocket zone at night. At the man-trap barrier, Elena suggested something smarter: medical foil wrappers. She taped a few empty foil packets from bandages to the bottom edge of the barrier. If it moved, they would crinkle, a sound you can't make silently. Third, we practiced drills. If the bell rang once, freeze and listen. If it rang twice, lights off, everyone to positions. If it rang continuously, we didn't fight in the corridor. We moved deeper into our pocket zone and prepared to evacuate through our second exit, a maintenance ladder that led into a building basement we'd cleared and kept quiet. We didn't want to use that basement exit often because it risked being seen, but it was our lifeline. The first real contact happened on day 19. We heard footsteps beyond the outer gate. Not shuffling, not dragging. Controlled steps, careful. Then a soft metallic tap, like someone touching the gate lightly to test if it was free. Elena and I took positions in the pocket zone behind the man-trap barrier. Lights off, eyes adjusting. Ray stood beside the outer gate with his headlamp off, one hand on the chain, the other holding a short pry bar like a baton. Marcus crouched behind a cabinet with a notebook open like he couldn't help himself. A voice came, quiet, spoken into the corridor like a prayer. "Hello?" It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a threat, it was the kind of hello you say when you hope the answer won't be a gun. Ray didn't answer. He looked at me. I thought hard and chose a rule: control the situation without revealing too much. I stepped forward to a point where my voice would carry, but my body wouldn't be visible through the gate mesh. "Stop where you are," I said, "hands where I can hear them." There was a pause. Then a soft laugh. Not mocking, just nervous. "I can do that," the voice said. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Name," I said. "Darren," he replied. "Used to do city survey work. I've got 2 people with me. We saw your markings." My stomach went cold. Our markings? We'd changed them. Unless he meant the chalk, unless he was the one leaving chalk. "You're the one with the chalk," I said. Another pause, then honesty. "Yeah," Darren said. "We're trying not to get lost. We didn't know someone else was down here." Ray mouthed a word at me. "Problem." Elena leaned in close and whispered, barely audible, "Survey people know how to map. If he's real, he's dangerous in the smart way." I kept my voice steady. "Why are you here?" "Same reason you are," Darren said. "Street level isn't survivable, too exposed. We found a route in through a parking basement. We've been moving away from noise." "And toward ours," I said. "Not on purpose," he said. "We heard a gate earlier in the week. We stayed back. Today, we ran out of clean water." That landed hard. Water is leverage, water is also morality. Elena's face changed in the dark. She didn't want to say no. She also didn't want to invite strangers into our pocket. I made a compromise that kept control. "I'm not opening the gate," I said, "but I can pass you water, 1 bottle. Then you leave the way you came." Darren exhaled, relief and frustration mixed. "Okay, thank you." Ray moved like a man who'd wired stations for decades. Slow, deliberate, no wasted motion. He loosened the chain just enough to slip a bottle through the mesh without opening the gate. Elena had filled it earlier with treated drip water. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the bottle slid through, I added, "And you stop marking this corridor." Darren hesitated. "If we don't mark, we die lost." "Mark your side," I said, "not ours." There was another pause. Then the sound of the bottle being tucked away. "Fair," he said. "Can I ask one more thing?" "No," Ray muttered, but Darren spoke anyway. "Are you mapping the old freight lines?" Darren asked. "Because there's a collapse 2 junctions south. The floor's unstable, someone could get hurt." That was valuable information. It was also a signal he knew the network. "You leave now," I said. "No more contact unless it's an emergency." "Understood," Darren said. "We'll back out." We listened as footsteps retreated. When the corridor went silent again, the 4 of us stood in darkness for a long moment, feeling the weight of what just happened. Not a fight, not a raid, just the knowledge that we weren't alone, and that the other people down here were competent. Competent people are harder to predict than desperate ones. The next few days were tense. Every creak in the gate sounded like a hand on metal. Every distant drip sounded like a footstep if you listened too long. Marcus started waking up at night to check the bell line like a ritual. Elena started rationing water tighter, not because we were low, but because she couldn't stop imagining Darren's crew stumbling thirsty in the dark. Ray, pragmatic as always, made the call that changed everything. "We need to move our center," he said on day 22. "This pocket is good, but it's known now. If they map it, they can come back with tools." "You want to abandon it?" Marcus asked, alarmed. "I want to upgrade," Ray corrected. "We keep this as a decoy. We build a real lockable safe zone deeper, where they don't expect it." That was the core idea, sharpened. Not just living underground, but controlling a network, using it as a maze you understood better than anyone else. We spent 2 days scouting deeper corridors, always returning before the surface light changed too much. We found a junction where 3 old freight lines met near a sealed shaft. One corridor was partially collapsed, which made it less attractive to outsiders. Another ran toward a utility chamber with airflow. The third connected, through a narrow passage, to a building basement we could use as an emergency exit. That junction became our new heart. Building locks deeper underground is harder because you can't haul heavy steel easily. So we built smart, not massive. We scavenged 2 rolling security grates from a damaged storefront, those lattice metal doors that roll down into a housing. They were heavy, but Ray knew how to break them down into manageable sections. We carried them on improvised sleds made from plastic office chair mats pulled by rope. It took hours. It took sweat. It took patience. At the new junction, we mounted the first grate across the corridor using angle brackets and wedge anchors. I drilled the anchor holes with a hand masonry bit and a makeshift brace. Slow, brutal work. Each anchor was a decision. Set it right, because you won't get a second chance easily. We added a mechanical control, a counterweight system using scrap chain and a pulley block we found in a maintenance cage. The grate could be raised and lowered quietly if you guided it. Noise was our enemy. Smooth motion was our friend. The lock itself was layered. A steel hasp bolted through the grate's bottom bar, anchored into a concrete block. 2 padlocks, different brands, different keyways, so one stolen key wouldn't solve both. A secondary drop bar behind it. A steel pipe that could be slotted into brackets to physically block the corridor even if someone cut locks. Then we built the inner door. Not a grate, but a solid barrier made from a pair of heavy steel service doors scavenged from a closed utility room. We bolted them into a new frame made of unistrut rails. The doors met in the middle and closed like a vault. They weren't airtight or pretty, but they were strong, and they allowed one key advantage. We could open one side just enough to look through a slit, and we could close it fast. 2-stage entry again, always 2-stage. And we did the thing nobody likes to do but everyone should. We named the zones. Outer pocket, front, inner junction, home, basement exit, ladder, collapse, corridor, rubble, air chamber, breeze. Naming makes communication faster. Faster communication reduces mistakes. Mistakes underground get people hurt. The paranoia didn't leave, it evolved. On day 26, we found new marks. Not chalk this time, but a thin strip of reflective tape placed at knee height near corner. Reflective tape is clever. Your light catches it just enough to guide you. It's also a sign of someone confident enough to leave a breadcrumb that shines. We didn't touch it. We studied it. Then Ray took a small piece of our own tape and placed it 2 corridors away, subtly wrong. An arrow that pointed toward rubble. "A test," he said. "If they follow it, they're not careful," Marcus whispered. "If they don't, they're mapping on their own," Elena said. That night, the bell line at front rang once. Then, 10 minutes later, it rang again. 2 gentle taps, not a trip. Someone was learning. We didn't sleep. We sat in home with the lights off, listening, while the city above us groaned in distant, occasional sound. Sirens that came and went like ghosts. Close to what I guessed was 2 in the morning, we heard it. A soft scraping, far away like metal on concrete. Then a muffled clink. Somebody handling a chain wrapped in rubber. Careful, but not perfect. Ray looked at me in the dark and made a motion. Hold. We waited. Minutes passed. Then a whisper floated down the corridor, too faint to catch, followed by another. 2 voices. Then silence. No forced entry, no attack, just reconnaissance. When the corridor went still again, Elena leaned toward me and murmured, "They're not desperate." "No," I whispered back, "they're patient." Patience is what breaks safe zones. People don't rush the front door, they map the back. So we did what underground survival is really about. We controlled the map. Over the next 3 days, we quietly sealed off 2 connecting corridors that weren't essential to our escape plan. Not permanently. Nothing underground is truly permanent, but enough to change traffic. We used rubble, steel shelving, and old cable spools to create obstacles that required time to move. Time creates sound. Sound creates warning. We also cleaned our presence. Any obvious footprints in damp dust were brushed away with a broom head. Any stray wrapper or tape piece was removed. We stopped cooking anything that smelled strong. We kept conversations low and short. We became shadows in our own home. On day 30, Darren came back. Not to the front gate, to our deeper corridor near Breeze. We knew it because we heard a single, deliberate tap on a pipe. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Our code. My skin prickled. Elena's eyes narrowed. Marcus looked like his brain wanted to run numbers. Ray's jaw tightened. "It's not an accident," Ray whispered. I approached the inner door and opened it an inch, using a flashlight through the crack, red light only. A man stood in the corridor, hands open, empty. Behind him, 2 shapes stayed back in the dark. "Darren," he said quietly when he saw the red glow, "I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because we have a problem." "What kind?" I asked. "Someone else is down here," he said. "Not you, not us." That landed like a cold drop of water down my spine. "We saw their marks," Darren continued. "Different style, not chalk, not tape. Scratches, like someone dragging metal. They're moving fast and they're not careful. We heard them trigger something. And then we heard movement behind them that wasn't human." Elena swallowed. "You mean the infected?" Darren nodded once. "Down here." That was the nightmare scenario. The tunnels had stayed mostly clear because there was nothing to attract them, until people started making noise, leaving doors open, moving through corridors. Underground, sound can lure trouble into places it would never find on its own. Ray leaned close to the door crack and spoke without opening it wider. "What do you want?" "A coordinated map," Darren said. "Or at least a truce. Because if someone's stirring them up down here, they'll drift. And if they drift, they'll find gates." The smart response was to say no, to close the door and keep our world small. But the real response, the one that survival forces on you, is that isolation is a temporary strategy. Networks connect. Problems move through connections. If we wanted home to stay safe, we needed to know what was happening in the wider underground. I made a controlled offer. "1 exchange," I said. "Information only, no entry." Darren nodded quickly, relief visible even in the dim red. "Okay." We spent 20 minutes trading the most valuable currency left, routes, hazards, and patterns. Darren's crew had found a small group deeper south that was running a gasoline generator underground. Reckless, loud, and dangerous. That generator noise had drawn infected down a corridor like moths to a light. The generator group had fled, leaving doors open. We told Darren about rubble, about our 2-stage gates, and about the fact that we'd heard careful reconnaissance near front. Darren's face tightened. "It wasn't us," he said. I believed him. Before he left, Darren did one last thing. He slid something across the floor toward the crack in our door. A folded piece of waterproof paper. "A partial map," he said. "The section you don't have." Ray hesitated, then hooked it with the end of his pry bar and pulled it inside. Darren stepped back. "We're leaving this branch," Darren said. "Going west through the old service galleries. If you hear metal scraping fast, don't follow it. Seal up. They're not thinking." Then he and his 2 shadows retreated into the dark. We opened the map under red light and stared at it like it was treasure. It showed corridors we hadn't found and, most importantly, it showed a second exit route that didn't require the basement ladder. A long, indirect path that emerged in a storm drain outflow beyond the densest streets. Options. Options are survival. That night, the tunnels changed. We heard the generator group first, not the generator itself, but the aftermath. A series of frantic footsteps, a cough, then a loud metallic bang that echoed through multiple corridors. Someone running blind. Then came the other sound. Irregular movement. Not careful, not controlled. A collective drift like a crowd shuffling, bumping walls, drawn by echoes. Elena's face went tight and pale in the dim. "They're coming," she whispered. We didn't argue, we executed. Lights off. Inner door closed. Drop bar set. Grate lowered and locked. Everyone low and silent. The infected didn't hit our gates like in the movies. There was no dramatic slam, no siege. It was worse. A slow, persistent presence. A scrape here, a bump there. A soft, wet breath in the corridor that made your skin crawl, even though you couldn't see it. They wandered. They tested. They followed sound. At one point, something leaned against the outer grate, hard enough to make the foil packets crinkle. Elena squeezed her eyes shut like she could will silence into the world. Ray held the carbon monoxide monitor in his palm, watching it like a talisman, even though it wasn't the threat right then. People cling to what they can measure when everything else is uncertain. Minutes stretched, then hours. Eventually, the corridor quieted. Not because danger disappeared, but because it drifted onward, chasing some other echo. We didn't celebrate, we didn't even speak, we just listened until dawn, until the distant city above us shifted into a different kind of silence. When we finally moved again, we did it with a new understanding. The underground was no longer a hidden highway. It was becoming a contested space. Someone was stirring it up. Someone was mapping carelessly. Someone was turning our advantage into a liability. And that meant our safe zone couldn't be just strong. It had to be adaptable. By day 32, we made the decision that would have sounded insane to me a month earlier. We were going to move home. Not to the surface. Deeper, but toward the new outflow route Darren's map revealed. Toward a section of tunnels less connected to downtown noise and more connected to storm infrastructure, still risky but more isolated. We packed with discipline. No loose metal, no rattling gear, keys on a clip, not a ring. Food sealed, water in tight bottles, tools wrapped in cloth. Before we left, we did something that felt like erasing our own footprints from existence. We stripped home. Locks came off, tape came down. Any sign that this junction mattered was removed. We left the gates in place, but we left them looking old and abandoned, not maintained. We scattered a little dust across the clean floor. We rubbed grease smears away. We made it look like a place you'd pass through without a second thought. Front became our decoy again, loud with the illusion of safety. Home became a blank spot on the map. The last thing I did was stand at the corridor mouth with my headlamp off and listen one more time to the tunnels around me, the city's hidden arteries. I thought about Darren, about whoever was scraping metal fast, about the generator group that had nearly poisoned themselves and then lured trouble into our world. I thought about how quickly humans turn maps into weapons. Then I turned and followed my small group into the dark, taking the new route not because it was comfortable, but because it was unknown. We didn't win. We didn't conquer the underground. That's not how real survival works. We learned to lock what we could, to move when we had to, and to treat every quiet corridor like it had a mind of its own, because in a city that's falling apart, the spaces between people become the real battlefield. And down there, beneath the street network, the most dangerous thing wasn't what wandered without thinking. It was what watched, measured, and patiently drew lines toward you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.